Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hi guys, so let's do it. Preemptive like, Knowledgia, great channel, new video. Why did the Crusaders sack Constantinople in 1204? Let's find out. Original link to the video, top of the description, right below that, link to the Discord. Would love to have you. Just click on it, send you right over there. So wasn't it sort of a case of, well, Jerusalem's really far away and we're already in Constantinople, so let's just sack this place? Let's find out.
The fall of Constantinople
Phones away.
in 1453 has been remembered for centuries, by some as a great tragedy and others as a marvelous victory. But for the former, the destruction of the Byzantine Empire and its dramatic collapse under the weight of Mehmed the Conqueror's spectacular invasion is not necessarily the first or only catastrophe.
I need to learn about that.
Invasion is not necessarily the first or only catastrophe staining the history of Constantinople today. In fact, possibly even more devastating was not the siege of the Byzantine capital by the Ottomans in the 15th century, but instead the sacking of Constantinople in 1204 by the Crusaders. By 1204, 3 crusades had already occurred, and so had the Great Schism. The Catholic and Orthodox churches had been officially divided since 1051, and politics of that time had a lot to do with.
Isn't that sort of what the Crimean War? Well, I'm off topic. No, go.
Divided since 1051, and politics of that time had a lot to do with it. But even so, the Western Church's military expeditions against their rival Muslim powers had seen unity between Christians regardless of which side of the schism each fell on. In fact,
I just have to say it so I get out of my head. Isn't that kind of what the Crimean... Wasn't the Crimean War about, like, Orthodox and Catholic? Well, no. Sorry, off topic. Okay, no.
Between Christians regardless of which side of the schism each fell on. In fact, the First Crusade had been intended to lend support to the Eastern Christians from the West, although some still believed the Orthodox to be heretics to the Catholic Church. Nevertheless, at this moment, there was a necessity for this divided church to stand together if they had any chance of pushing back against the expanding Muslim powers nearby.
Interesting. So they didn't exactly like each other, but especially so for the Eastern Orthodox, it was you need the help of the Western Catholic in order to fight off the Ottomans. And if you're the Western Catholic, you want the Eastern Orthodox as, yeah, they're heretics, but they're still kind of less heretic than they would see Muslims, I'm guessing. And so it's a good kind of buffer zone between them and the Muslim world.
That was, however, until the Fourth Crusade. In spite of appearing united on the surface, the state of tensions between the West and East was nowhere near non-existent, and at times it was even increasing. The pride and fervor that the Crusades had produced in Catholic Christians would often backfire in the sense of creating an even stronger disdain for their Orthodox counterparts. But nonetheless, the Western Crusaders were still open to the concept of working together with the East. But first, Pope Innocent III began to call for another crusade by the West, aiming to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims as they had failed to do prior.
Guys, the papal state borders is very strange to me, because the fact that it cuts through the Italian peninsula and separates, the northern and southern parts. So was the area in Italy, Italian peninsula, below the south of the Papal States controlled by someone, like, not controlled by up here? So, like, was this a separate controlled area, and then north of the Papal States was another one?
These preachings began at the start of the 13th century and were aimed at the Christians of France, Germany, and England. With the help of Fulk of Neuilly, these preachings eventually led to the formation of a new Crusader army. The plan this time was to reach Jerusalem via an invasion of Egypt. In order to do that, though, the Crusaders needed help with travel and subsequently reached out to the Venetians. Despite some hesitancy from the latter, they eventually agreed to assist their fellow Christians and offered to deliver over 30,000 Crusaders to their desired destination. As a result, 20,000 foot soldiers, 4,500 knights, and 9,000 squires were gathered for the new crusade. But they would have to wait. The Venetians...
What's a squire again? A shield bearer or armor bearer of a knight. Okay. Where am I?
Still had to build a new fleet and prepare for the expedition, which would take roughly an entire year. Eventually, though, the ships were ready to set sail, as were the Venetian crews meant to man them. Not all of the Crusaders who had been intended to depart from Venice for Cairo actually showed up, though, as some opted to leave from other ports by other means. This meant that only about 12,000 of the expected 33,000 or so would actually show up in Venice to utilize the newly constructed Venetian fleet manned by the freshly trained Venetian sailors. Regardless, Venice had done its part in providing the transport and crews, and so the Crusaders were expected to still pay the full agreed-upon price despite only needing passage for under half the number of men.
Not a good start.
This quickly became problematic, though, because the Crusaders that did show up didn't have all of the necessary funds, and the Venetians...
The Crusades are so crazy. It just sounds... you're just like putting out this notice. It's like there's no structure, or little structure, not well organized or executed. And it's just like... just this religious fervor of just like everyone. The Pope said, take back the Holy Land. And then people just just go instead of joining up. And that's insane to me. That it makes sense, but it's crazy.
Were refusing to accept anything less. Venice had lost significant money due to stalled commerce while building the fleet of 50 war galleys
that makes
and
sense.
450 transports, making it impossible for them to accept a smaller sum. The solution, according to Doge Dandolo of Venice, was for the Crusaders to sack a nearby city, particularly the port of Zara, which had recently become an enemy of the Venetians. Zara,
Why?
at this point in time, was under the protection of King Emmerich of Hungary and Croatia, which horrified many of the Crusaders at the idea of attacking the city, because Emmerich was a devout Catholic and Crusader himself. Many subsequently left, either finding alternative travel to Egypt or simply going home. Opinion from the papacy was also conflicted, as the Pope found the idea absolutely inexcusable and grounds for excommunication, while the papal legate, Cardinal Peter of Capua, insisted that it was a necessary sacrifice for the Crusades to continue. Refusing to budge on his perspective, the Pope sent Peter of Lucedio to deliver a letter to the Crusaders in Venice, which stated that under no circumstances should they carry out any acts of violence against their fellow Christians. But
it literally is the fighting of two religions. Rather, I don't know how. I'd imagine the Ottomans are probably more organized. I mean, how can you be less organized? But the fact that it's just no structure. And people are just like, yeah, go home. No one's ready. No one. It's just they're that fanatical that they're just like, all right, get up and leave.
this was either ignored or failed to reach the Crusaders in time. By November 11th, 1202, the army had arrived at Zara, and less than 2 weeks later, the city collapsed under the Crusaders' siege. Together, the Crusaders and Venetians then sacked the city, which horrified Pope Innocent III when word got back to Rome. Furious, he excommunicated each of them and demanded that they continue their travel toward the Holy Land immediately. But although this may have been the initial plan, the Pope was about to be disappointed again, and to an even more severe degree.
It's just that there's no the objective is a religious one. It's like, go to Jerusalem because it's Jerusalem. And there's no like strategic objective like defeat the Ottomans in battle, and it's crazy and it's sad. Not sad. It's
One of the Crusaders, Boniface I of Montferrat, had left earlier on to visit a cousin of his, who happened to be the brother-in-law of Alexios IV Angelos. Alexios was the son of Isaac II Angelos, who had recently been ousted as Emperor of Byzantium, and he was determined to take back the throne his father had held. While in Philip's court, Alexios and Boniface met, at which point the Byzantine requested help from the Crusaders in regaining the crown back in Constantinople. By 1203, most of the Crusades' leaders had agreed to the deal proposed by Alexios, although some refused, as this would require them to attack Constantinople itself. Those unwilling to participate found their own transportation onward, while the rest joined Alexios in the controversial mission and sailed off for the capital of Byzantium. The goal now was simple: restore Alexios to the throne, and then carry on to Egypt and Jerusalem. The actual events that were to come, however, were not so straightforward. Initially, the Crusaders were able to put Alexios back in power, although he would only rule as a co-emperor alongside his father. In response to the attack upon the Crusaders' arrival and the reigning emperor's decision to flee the city, the imperial officials had actually recrowned Isaac II, which made the situation slightly confusing for the Crusaders, who still wanted the rewards they had been promised as part of their deal with Alexios. As a compromise to ensure that their efforts had not been in vain, the Crusaders demanded that Alexios must be crowned alongside his father, or else they would not relent. On August 1st, 1203, they got their wish. In spite of their persistence, though, the Crusaders were only temporarily successful. Alexios was not well liked within Constantinople, to put it lightly, and tensions with his rival, Alexios III, pushed him to ask the Crusaders for an extension on their contracts. They agreed, but quickly became more of a menace than a help after rioting broke out, resulting in Latin casualties and fiery Crusader retaliation. Instability in Byzantium only grew from that point on, and the
I don't see all of this as like religious, you know. Obviously the religion is the cover, but this is just like humans being humans. It's oh my god. I just imagine like a mob and the people in here being like, there's a lot of people out there. You gotta listen to them and doing this. And they're like, okay. And then they come in. And then, of course, this breaks out. Like, what are you going to do with all the people in the city?
revolutionary efforts of Constantinople's citizens led to the ousting and assassination of Alexios IV, which absolutely enraged the crusading force. The troops insisted that Alexios V, who had been at the head of the movement to rid Byzantium of the previous one, take over the deceased emperor's portion of the contract and pay the Crusaders what they were owed. He simply refused. Now, in the spring of 1204, ignoring renewed resistance from the desperate Pope, the Crusaders yet again launched an offensive against the capital of Byzantium. In a matter of days, the troubled city fell to the Crusaders. It was at this point that the infamous and, to many, horrifying sack of Constantinople was carried out. The incensed Crusaders wreaked havoc throughout the ancient capital of the Romans, looting homes and properties, burning down buildings, killing and defiling innocent civilians, and even destroying the churches.
The thing about religion that is so crazy is that there's so many ways to justify stuff. It's like I guarantee, like they got up there, it's like, thou shalt not kill, right? Oh, but he's Orthodox, or like thou shalt not. It's just it's a pick and choose. Like you follow it when you want to, and insert cognitive dissonance. Just people are nuts.
of their supposed brothers in Christ. When word reached Pope Innocent of just how far the Crusaders had gone, he was infuriated beyond belief. Time after time, these alleged Christian heroes had let him down and turned on their own. And, according to historian Speros Virinus, the Fourth Crusade and the crusading movement generally thus resulted, ultimately, in the victory of Islam. A result which was, of course, the exact opposite of its original intention.
Oh, God. What was I gonna say? I had a question. Oh yeah. So what did so was it the Pope, the one, right, who called the crusade? What did he think was going to happen? Did he think like everyone would magically just like designate generals and people in charge, and everyone would form these coherent armies and would march orderly on to defeat Islam in battle on the way to Jerusalem, and then they'd raise their flag, and then hands washed, and just everything would be cool? I'm not blaming any of these people going into the city. I'm blaming the person who started it. It seems to go exactly how you'd think.
So, the reason for the shocking and horrifying sack of Christian Constantinople by the Western Crusaders can be explained in multiple ways. On one hand, this particular band of fighters had shown back at Zara that they had no qualms about attacking those who shared their faith. Additionally, the offer made by Alexios IV, which was to reward the Crusaders with treasures and submission of the Eastern Church to the West for their efforts to support him, was too good to turn down. And lastly, the events that followed the rise and fall of Alexios as co-emperor, including the death of his father during his reign, were enough to push the eager-to-fight Crusaders over the edge and in complete opposition to not only Constantinople, but Byzantium and the whole East. Any progress that had been made to bring the two sides of the church together seemed more in vain now than ever. Politics, money, and personal interests mattered way more than any biblical teachings.
Okay, so I just imagine like the Ottomans being like, all right, like being terrified, like hearing of word of this giant mass of Christians just going towards them to kill them and take back. And then just hearing like, yeah, they all just like destroyed each other on the way. And oh, Byzantium's gonna fall, and without even having to lift a finger.
Or any moral behavior, the East-West schism had never been so clear.
Awesome video. Knowledge is amazing. What if the USA broke up? New England? I should watch that. Cool video. If you can answer any of my questions, or, hope you guys are doing well, by the way. I'll be back with another video soon. See you guys. Bye.